I'll begin my story on what everyone insisted was the happiest day of my son's life, Lucas's wedding. As for me, it was the day I was given a title I'll probably never forget, the family's fat pig. Shocking, right? I nearly choked on the piece of cake in my mouth. Oh, that's right, let me introduce myself. My name is Clara Turner. I'm in my early 60s, a widow who lives simply with nothing particularly remarkable about me other than my fondness for tea and morning walks. Few people know that behind me lies a long story filled with secrets, decisions, and a fortune even my own son is unaware of. But don't rush me, I'll tell you everything little by little. And by the way, if you're watching this video, hit the like button and subscribe. I want to see just how far my story can go. Don't forget to drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. I'm really curious. Back to the wedding. The ceremony was held at the Reynolds estate, a mansion spanning more than 50 acres, with gardens manicured like something out of a magazine. I swear there were so many fresh flowers that if a bee had flown in, it would have thought it had stumbled into an insect-exclusive paradise. Everything gleamed, from the private chapel which seated 300 people to the 12-piece orchestra playing so majestically, the guests tilted their heads back as if attending a royal banquet. Jessica, the bride of the day, my brand-new daughter-in-law, walked down the aisle in a gown that, by my guess, cost the equivalent of 3 years' salary for a regular engineer. Lucas looked radiant, happy. Seeing my son smile, that brightly softened my heart. I'd long awaited this day, though I never imagined I'd become the main comedic act of the show. I had chosen a simple navy blue dress, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace. I've always believed the key to keeping one's private life private is dressing exactly to others' expectations. Not too flashy, not too shabby. Just an ordinary widow, living comfortably on her pension and her late husband's life insurance. To be honest, I've practiced this camouflage of simplicity for 15 years, to the point I've mastered it better than most private investigators. Everything was going smoothly until Jessica brought her parents over to me at the reception. She was all smiles, her voice so sweet it sent chills down my spine. "Mom, Dad, this is Lucas's mother." I was about to put on a polite smile when, boom, she dropped the next line, light as air, but loud enough for the entire table to hear. "This is the family embarrassment, or to put it bluntly, the fat pig of the house." The air froze. I swear, even the violinists missed a note. I gave a small laugh and took another sip of wine. The others chuckled along, the kind of polite laughter meant to smooth over tension. I'm used to being judged by my weight. People tend to forget that weight doesn't always correspond to the weight of one's bank account. But what stuck with me wasn't the insult. It was the stunned look on Jessica's father, Robert Reynolds. He stared at me, then his eyes went wide as if he'd seen a ghost. "Clara Turner. Impossible. You're the mysterious investor who bought my company?" Ah, bingo. That was the real turning point. Jessica's face drained of color. Her confident smile evaporated, replaced by bewilderment. Her mother adjusted her diamond necklace, eyes darting over me as though re-scanning her family's entire portfolio. I sat calmly, shrugged, and said, "You must be mistaken." Probably someone else. But Robert and I both knew the truth. 3 years ago, in a conference room packed with lawyers, he had briefly seen me sitting quietly in the corner. Back then, he thought I was just the wife tagging along. Little did he know I was the one pulling the strings, orchestrating the deal that bought his company for nearly $100 million. Honestly, I'd never intended to brag. But that day, when I heard the words, "fat pig," I almost wanted to throw my head back and laugh. Oh, sweetheart, if a fat pig can buy your father's company, then pigs must be the most powerful creatures alive. Of course, I didn't say that. I just smiled, took another bite of wedding cake, and told myself, the real game had only just begun. If you think I was born sitting on a pile of money, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I didn't inherit any mansion, nor did anyone slip a fat check into my hand. Both Henry, my late husband, and I were just ordinary engineers, grinding away at a tech company in Austin. We met while working on a project so boring that our colleagues jokingly called it the sleep major. But maybe boredom was exactly the cradle that gave birth to the invention that changed our lives. Henry was the quiet type, his eyes always lighting up when staring at equations or lines of code dancing across a screen. I was the opposite, a mouth that never stopped, always teasing those serious, old man programmers. One evening in 2010, Henry was hunched over his beat-up old computer, typing furiously. I sat there munching popcorn, grumbling. "What are you doing, husband? Writing secret codes to talk to aliens?" He looked up, eyes sparkling. "No, Clara. I think I've figured out a way to make data shrink." Shrink? You mean like putting data on a diet? If so, start with my waistline first. We both burst out laughing, but then he patiently explained he discovered a new data compression algorithm that could shrink storage down to just 1/5 of its original size without losing quality. To me, it sounded like a magic trick. To the tech industry, it was a gold mine. Within a year, the big corporations were knocking on our door. They fought over ownership as if it were the only ticket to the future. I still remember that negotiation in 2012 when a company rep slid a contract across the table with a figure so huge I had to blink 3 times, $25 million. I turned to Henry, heart pounding. "You sure they didn't add an extra 0 by mistake?" He just smiled. "No mistake, Clara. This is only the beginning." We signed. And he was right. It was only the beginning. People like to say, when you have money, it's easy to burn through it. But Henry and I chose the opposite path. Instead of buying mansions, sports cars, or yachts, we threw ourselves into learning how to invest. We started with safe stocks, things you could almost guarantee wouldn't tank. Then we moved on to growth companies and later, real estate in up-and-coming areas. Henry had an uncanny eye. He could smell opportunity from miles away. When everyone dismissed a little cloud storage startup, Henry bought shares. 3 years later, the value had multiplied tenfold. When the real estate market froze, he bought a row of small apartments. 5 years later, they'd tripled in value. Every time he was right, I'd tease him, "You must have a crystal ball hidden somewhere. Or maybe you signed a contract with some psychic." He'd just chuckle and go right back to reading financial reports as thick as romance novels. By 2020, when Henry passed away, our portfolio had grown past $500 million, enough to keep plenty of people awake at night. Me? I lost sleep for only one reason, missing him. After the funeral, I stood at a crossroads. Funny thing, too much money can sometimes feel like a burden. I could have stepped into the spotlight, played the tycoon, appeared in magazines, and shocked everyone. But I chose the opposite silence. Why? Because I wanted Lucas, my son, to walk on his own 2 feet. I still remember when he finished his master's in marketing. He was so excited. "Mom, I'll buy my first house before I'm 35. I just smiled, too soft-hearted to say that if I wanted, I could buy the entire block he had his eye on. He worked 60 hours a week, saving every penny. I felt for him, but I was proud because I knew if he ever discovered his mother had a colossal fortune, he'd no longer be the strong Lucas I cherished. He'd just become a shadow living off my wealth, and I never wanted that. So for 15 years, I pretended to live like a widow just getting by. I drove an old sedan, shopped at regular supermarkets, wore department store dresses, and avoided designer handbags and flashy diamonds. My friends all thought I was living off a pension and Henry's life insurance. They had no clue my investment accounts were bigger than the budget of the entire town. Sometimes I'd laugh to myself, my son is pinching pennies to buy a house, while I'm considering buying the whole construction company that builds those houses. That's my secret. I pretended to be poor for 15 years, not because I enjoyed austerity, but because sometimes true wealth isn't for showing off, it's for protecting. And that very silence today has turned into a double-edged sword. Because when Robert Reynolds saw me at the wedding and realized who I really was, everything began to shake. If you thought the story ended right after the wedding with my daughter-in-law calling me a fat pig, let me assure you, that was only the prologue. My new daughter-in-law, Jessica Reynolds. Oh wait, Jessica Turner now was not the kind of woman who sat still. She went to Wharton, the most prestigious business school in the country, and she acted as if the entire world was her MBA classroom, while everyone else was just an intern for her presentation. I was never impressed with the whole rich girl with an Ivy League degree thing. But to be fair, Jessica had guts. Just 2 days after the wedding, I got a text inviting me to lunch. Not the polite kind, "Mom, I'd love to get to know you better." No, her message was exactly 3 lines. "Clara, lunch tomorrow, Le Jardin, family business to discuss. Jessica." It looked more like a board meeting invite than a family lunch. I laughed, then agreed. I was curious to see what the Wharton daughter-in-law's family strategy would be. The next day, I arrived right on time, or rather, deliberately 10 minutes late. I wanted to see how she'd react. And sure enough, Jessica was already seated, back straight as a ruler, a thick stack of documents in front of her. Next to her, Lucas sat slouched like a schoolboy dragged into a parent-teacher conference. "Clara, thank you for coming." Jessica began with a wide smile. "I picked out this 1996 Bordeaux. Perfect way to start an important conversation." I raised my glass, took a small sip, and replied casually, "Delicious. But don't you think it's a bit too fancy for a family lunch?" Jessica just beamed, eyes sparkling as if she were about to unveil a grand strategy. "I've been thinking a lot about how we can make our family's future more sustainable," she said, flipping open her file. "With your background, my husband's experience, and my modern management knowledge, I believe we can launch a promising new business." I nodded, stayed quiet, and let her continue. Jessica took a breath, her tone sharp. "Lucas and I want to start a real estate tech company, a digital platform connecting high-end renters with luxury properties, bundled with full-service management. This will be the strategic move to make the Turner family a rising power in the industry." Lucas awkwardly chimed in. We've talked about it a lot, Mom. It's really a big opportunity." Jessica nodded eagerly. "To get started, we'll need an initial investment, around $50 million. With that, we can hire engineers, build the platform, and launch a nationwide marketing campaign within 2 years. And of course, Mom, you'll be the founding investor. Later, your name will be forever tied to the company." I cleared my throat. $50 million, spoken as if she were talking about leaving a tip after lunch. "Interesting," I said softly, keeping my tone even. "So who exactly would be running this company?" "Of course we'd manage it together, Mom," Jessica answered quickly. "A founding board, me, Lucas, and you. 3 equal votes. Very fair, very transparent." I looked at Lucas. He was sweating bullets, looking like he was trying to translate in his head. "My wife wants my mom to hand over $50 million to start a company?" "What do you think, Lucas?" I asked, pretending to be serious. He stammered, I guess it could be good if you agree, Mom." Inside, I was laughing. I wasn't shocked that Jessica wanted money. What amused me was her approach, direct, bold, as if negotiating a corporate merger. It reminded me of Robert, her father, back in the boardroom. He once said almost the exact same thing. "Let me take the lead. I know how to manage." The result? He nearly drove his company into bankruptcy until I bought it out for a mere $100 million. Maybe that overconfidence was a family heirloom in the Reynolds line. I leaned back, looked at Jessica. Great idea, really. "But tell me, Jessica, how long have you been married to Lucas now?" "Oh, that's right. 3 days." Lucas flinched, but Jessica kept smiling. I continued. "So in 3 days of marriage, You've already come up with a plan to have me invest $50 million into your company. That's fast. If we were in the honeymoon phase, I suppose you'd already be proposing an IPO. Lucas coughed into his hand. Jessica's smile stiffened, but she managed to reply, "You misunderstand, Mom. I just want our family to grow in a structured way." I smiled, took another sip of wine. You know, Jessica, in 60 years of life, I've learned one thing. Family is not a company. Families need love and honesty, not a board of directors. I didn't say another word. Sometimes silence is the politest way to refuse. But inside, I knew this Wharton daughter-in-law was no pushover. She wasn't going to stop with one lunch and a stack of documents. This was just her opening move in a very long game. And me, Clara Turner, the woman who pretended to be poor for 15 years, I wasn't afraid. If Jessica wanted to play power games, fine. I've beaten plenty of CEOs in my time. Why should I be afraid of a daughter-in-law barely 3 days into the family? They say that in marriage, couples often develop a habit of spying on each other, checking texts, eavesdropping on calls, and even hiring private investigators if suspicion becomes too heavy. I never did that with Henry, but life has a funny way of twisting itself because the very first private investigator I ever dealt with came not from a jealous husband, but from my own daughter-in-law. I found out when an old friend from the finance world called me. "Clara," he said, half amused, half worried, "there's a PI poking around, asking questions about that shell company you used a few years ago. Someone wants to know who was really behind the Reynolds Holdings takeover." I burst out laughing. If it were Jessica, I could spot her hand a mile away. That girl wasn't even comfortable calling me Mom yet, but she was already investigating me as if I were a rival CEO. And what's my golden rule, you ask? Whoever investigates me, I investigate right back. So I picked up the phone and called James Sullivan, my longtime financial advisor, the man who helped me build an investment network as tight and winding as a maze. I asked him to run a background check on the Reynolds family. If Jessica wanted to play the snooping game, I'd let her see the real face of her own household. 3 days later, James showed up at my apartment with a thick file. He dropped it on the table, raised an eyebrow. "Clara, are you sure you want to read this?" "Trust me, it's not pretty." "Let me be the judge of that," I said, opening the folder. The name Reynolds Holdings had once been a badge of pride in Virginia. The company's value had soared into the hundreds of millions, working in construction and commercial real estate. But then Robert Reynolds, Jessica's father, decided to go big. In 2016, he borrowed heavily to expand his business. He acquired small firms, built shopping centers, and signed long-term loan agreements. On paper, it looked like an empire rising. In reality, it was a sandcastle at high tide. When the economy stalled, the debts came crashing down. The company bled red, quarter after quarter. Shareholders panicked. By 2019, Reynolds Holdings was drowning in liabilities, teetering on bankruptcy. That was when I stepped in. Through a shell company, I put down $100 million. Sounds big, but it was only a fifth of what the company had once been worth to buy Reynolds Holdings outright. For me, it was a golden opportunity. Strong infrastructure, a solid customer base, just lacking someone with a working brain in charge. And I had both the capital and the patience. So Reynolds Holdings was pulled back from the cliff. I appointed a new board, restructured the finances, axed the deadweight projects, and kept the core business alive. 3 years later, the company was stable again, providing jobs for thousands. Let's be blunt. If not for Fat Pig, Clara, that company would have been stripped bare by creditors long ago. I leaned back in my chair, holding the financial report James had handed me, and couldn't help laughing. So the whole family's living off the data compression algorithm they don't even remember the name of. That's right. Thanks to Henry's invention, the algorithm we sold for $25 million more than a decade ago, I had the capital to invest. With that capital, I bought Reynolds Holdings and kept it from collapsing. In other words, My daughter-in-law walked down the aisle in a wedding gown worth hundreds of thousands on a rose-petaled path, indirectly paid for by the very algorithm her father couldn't even remember the inventor of. And the best part? Since my acquisition, Robert Reynolds has been living comfortably off consulting fees. I personally arranged for him. He believed he still had an important role, when in truth, he was just a hired consultant I kept on the payroll so he wouldn't lose face. And yet, here, his daughter was hiring detectives to dig into my past, daring to call me the family embarrassment. If that isn't comedy, what is? I sipped my coffee, staring at the pile of documents spread across my table. Inside was the whole truth, the crushing debts, the salvation money that came from me. I thought to myself, Jessica, if you want to play the power game, remember this board was mine to begin with. And you're just the newest pawn on it. I knew this day would come sooner or later. At Le Jardin, Jessica had already delivered her little MBA pitch about the prop tech project she and Lucas wanted to launch, along with the modest ask of $50 million in seed funding. I sat there quietly, sipping wine, just watching to see what moves she would make next. And just as I expected, not even a week later, I got a text. Mom will stop by your place tomorrow night. There's something important to discuss about the family's future. Family's future? Huh? I snorted. In my experience, anyone who opens with that phrase is 90% likely trying to get their hands on your wallet. That evening, Lucas and Jessica showed up. Lucas held a hastily bought bouquet from the supermarket. Jessica wore a tailored suit and carried a leather portfolio. She looked exactly like a young CEO about to do a roadshow for investors. Clara, thanks for letting us come over, Jessica said, voice syrupy sweet but eyes like knives. I led them into the living room where I'd set out a plate of cookies and a hot pot of tea. A warm, homely setup, deliberately at odds with the tension Jessica had brought with her. No small talk. Jessica opened her portfolio and neatly spread a stack of documents on the coffee table. You probably remember the prop tech project I mentioned at Le Jardin last week, she said confidently. We've worked with advisors and tightened the plan. This is the draft financials and the IPO roadmap. She pushed the pages toward me while Lucas sat there, face mixing hope and anxiety. Now it's decision time, Mom. If you agree to invest $50 million, we can launch next quarter. This is not only an investment, it's a guarantee for the Turner Reynolds family's future. I flipped through a few pages, charts, growth projections, green and red graphs straight out of a venture fund slide deck. I put them down and looked at Jessica, trying not to laugh. Very professional, I said. You prepared this thoroughly. Jessica smiled like she'd already won. Lucas cleared his throat, hesitant. Mom, this is a huge opportunity. If you trust us, we'll give it everything to make it work. I folded my arms and leaned back. You know, you two, I've met plenty of entrepreneurs. Everyone starts with the word opportunity. Few start with the words risk and downside. Jessica didn't flinch. She pushed the paperwork closer. Don't worry, Mom. We've done the math. Returns could be threefold in 5 years. This isn't a pipe dream. It's a global trend. I smiled and slowly I placed another stack of papers on the table papers I'd prepared and kept ready. Not a funding memo, but photocopies of the memo James Sullivan, my financial advisor, had given me. Jessica, you've got talent, I said. If there were an Oscar for a newlywed playing an ambitious CEO, you'd win. Lucas snapped his head toward me. Mom, why are you saying that? Because, I set down another pile, I just read the supporting script she's been writing for her role. I opened the packet and handed Lucas one page. This is the contract Jessica signed with Aguilar Private Investigations. 2 weeks ago, your sweet new wife hired a private investigator to look into the shell company behind the acquisition of Reynolds Holdings. Lucas went pale. Jessica, you did that? Jessica blinked, voice scrambling. It's not what you think. I didn't give her a chance to finish. I reached for another sheet. And here are statements for 3 new credit cards opened in the last month, totaling $150,000 in available credit. All of them were opened based on the idea of future family assets. In short, she's spending against money she assumes she'll get from me. Lucas gaped. Jessica's face flushed. She tried to recover. "You're twisting things, Mom," she said. I shook my head slowly. "No. These are notes from a consultation with Vance Peters and Associates, a law firm that handles family asset disputes. Jessica, you actually consulted a lawyer?" Lucas turned to his wife, voice shaking. "Are you planning to sue my mother?" Jessica stammered, "No, I just wanted to be prepared." I folded my arms and fixed her with a stare. "Prepared? You've been married barely any time, and you've already hired a PI, consulted a lawyer, and opened credit lines as an escape route. If this isn't the script for a hostile takeover, what is?" The living room froze. Lucas bowed his head into his hands. Jessica pressed her lips together until they were white. I breathed out but kept my tone firm. "Jessica, you're smart and ambitious. But you forgot one thing. Marriage is not a business transaction. Lucas is not a share, and I, Clara Turner, am not a venture fund you can call on whenever you want capital." Silence. I stood up and gathered my files. "You two can go home and think about it. But remember this, in my house, money is never a weapon to control affection." I walked them to the door. Lucas walked beside his wife, his shoulders heavy. Jessica bit her lip until it showed white. I closed the door and felt one clear thought rise up inside me. If Jessica thinks she can bully me into signing a $50 million check with a few glossy documents, she's still very green. This game is long, and I have never lost a single match. The big meeting finally happened, just as I had predicted. But instead of only Jessica and Lucas, this time she brought her full supporting cast to my house. Robert and Paula, her parents, plus a slick lawyer in a polished suit, shiny leather shoes, and a black briefcase, as if they were here to close a corporate merger. I looked at the scene and nearly burst out laughing. The wedding was only a few weeks ago, and already my daughter-in-law had managed to turn my living room into a negotiation boardroom. Robert opened the discussion, his voice booming like he was standing at a shareholders' conference. "Clara, my wife and I invested $15 million into Jessica's startup. Now Lucas is your son, and we believe it's only fair that you contribute an equal amount. That way things remain balanced, don't you agree?" Paula chimed in immediately, wearing the kind of overly polite smile that no one could believe was genuine. "That's right, Clara. This isn't just about money, it's about fairness in marriage. Our daughter cannot be the only one carrying responsibility." Jessica, sitting beside them, nodded along, her face glowing with the confidence of someone who thought she had already won. "Mom, my parents trusted me with $15 million. Lucas deserves the same support from you. That's how both families can build the future together." I poured tea slowly, letting the jasmine steam rise in delicate curls, then set my cup down with deliberate calm. "Sounds convincing," I said lightly, "but there's just one small problem." All 4 of them leaned forward, waiting. I smiled and opened the folder I had prepared in advance. I slid the first page toward Robert. "Robert, here's the mortgage record on your Charlottesville estate. It's been pledged nearly to the hilt. You've got only 20% equity left." Then I turned to Paula and pushed another page across the table. "Paula, this is your investment account statement. Empty. You drained it all to maintain a lavish lifestyle. Not a penny left." I paused, then tapped a final report on the table with my finger. "And most importantly, both of you are living off consulting fees I arranged for Robert through Reynolds Holdings. If I pull those back, that income disappears overnight." The room fell silent. I could hear the faint clatter of a pen dropping onto the wooden table. Robert's mouth opened, but no words came out. Paula's face turned pale, the diamond rings on her trembling fingers catching the light. Jessica tried to salvage the moment, her voice shaky. "Mom, You've misunderstood. I only wanted. I cut her off, my tone sharp as steel. You wanted $50 million. You used the excuse of your parents' so-called $15 million investment to put pressure on me. But the truth is that $15 million exists only in your imagination. The reality is, your entire family has been living off the data compression algorithm my husband invented over a decade ago. Jessica's cheeks burned red, her lips pressed into a tight line. Lucas sat frozen, his hands clasped together, as if he'd just woken from a very bad dream. I took another sip of tea, then leaned forward. So, instead of this charade of fairness, let me give you a clearer proposal. I locked eyes with Jessica. You'll get $5 million one time only once. In exchange, you walk away from Lucas forever. Otherwise, you'll get nothing but the ugly truth laid bare. The air in the room froze solid. I swear, if a fly had buzzed by, everyone would have heard its wings. Robert's jaw dropped like he'd swallowed ice. Paula went white as chalk, her hands clenching together. The once confident lawyer now looked around nervously, as if searching for an escape hatch. And Jessica. She sat speechless, eyes shimmering with tears, her face flushed with a mix of rage and humiliation. Lucas just sat there, stunned into silence, looking from me to his wife in disbelief, as though he couldn't reconcile what he was hearing with the life he thought he had. I rose to my feet, my voice steady and unyielding. You have 72 hours to decide. Take the $5 million and disappear, or stay and be left with nothing. In this game, I set the rules. I let the words hang in the heavy air before I walked out of the room, leaving them all to stew in the suffocating silence. Inside, only one thought echoed in my mind. I'd played poor for years to keep the peace, but if anyone thought they could make me the prey in their game, they had better be prepared. Jessica vanished faster than a summer storm. One morning, her lawyer, Mark Vance, called James Sullivan to confirm receipt of the $5 million payout. By that afternoon, Jessica had packed her bags and walked out of the apartment she shared with Lucas. No goodbyes, no crocodile tears, just a few sheets of paper and a wedding ring left sitting on the table. Lucas fell apart. He wandered the streets like a man stripped of his soul. That first night after Jessica left, he came to my house, sat at the kitchen table, buried his face in his arms, and sobbed. For the first time since his father's passing, I saw my son cry that hard. "I don't understand, Mom," he kept repeating. "What did I do wrong that she left me?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured him a glass of water, laid my hand on his shoulder, and simply said, "Son, not every loss is a punishment. Sometimes it's freedom in disguise." But Lucas couldn't accept that, at least not then. He blamed me, of course. "You drove Jessica away. If you hadn't interfered, maybe things could have been different." I let him rage. Partly because I understood, partly because I knew time would eventually speak for me. And indeed, only 3 weeks later, Lucas filed for divorce. Irreconcilable differences was all he wrote. I read it with a mix of pain and relief. Pain for my son, but relief that he'd finally chosen to stand tall instead of clinging to a sham of a marriage. The months that followed were hard. Lucas worked like a machine by day, then returned to an empty apartment at night. He avoided talking about Jessica. He even avoided family dinners with me. I didn't push. I knew some wounds needed time, not words. Then one day, he called out of the blue. His voice sounded lighter, almost like the boy I used to know. "Mom, I met someone." I laughed. "Oh, let's just hope this one doesn't show up with a PowerPoint presentation." Her name was Sarah, a simple elementary school teacher with chestnut hair, a gentle smile, and eyes that carried a light I thought existed only in fairy tales. Sarah didn't care about deals, shares, or brand names. What she cared about were her students, their progress, their struggles, their need for patience and love. The first time she met me, She shook my hand firmly and said, "Mrs. Turner, Lucas told me you love baking cookies. Next time, I'd love to learn your secret recipe. Not a single question about money, not a glance at what car I drove or what kind of house I lived in. Once, just for fun, I told Sarah I drove an old sedan, nothing fancy, the kind of car elderly women in the neighborhood might take to the market. She beamed and said instantly, 'That's adorable. A car like that is safe and dependable. If I had my own, that's exactly the kind I'd want.' I burst out laughing, thinking, if it had been Jessica, the first thing out of her mouth would have been, 'What brand? What year? How much did it cost?' Lucas began to change around Sarah. He wasn't brooding anymore. He smiled more often, sharing little stories how Sarah taught her students cursive writing, how they planted flowers together on her balcony. One evening, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and admitted, 'Mom, I know I blamed you a lot back then, but now I see you were only trying to protect me. If it hadn't been for you, I'd still be trapped in a marriage built on lies.' I looked into his eyes steadier, clearer, more mature than ever before, and felt a swell of pride rise inside me. The marriage had ended, but freedom had blossomed. Lucas was finally himself again, an honest young man, hard-working and genuine, no longer pretending to be some polished entrepreneur to please anyone. And me? I still sit here with my cup of jasmine tea, reflecting on everything that's happened. There's been bitterness, yes, loss too. However, in the end, truth prevailed. And I, Clara Turner, the woman who pretended to be poor for 15 years, choose to smile. Because I know one thing for certain, money can buy many things, but it will never buy love that's real. And thankfully, my son has finally found that. Taos isn't a noisy city, nor is it some financial hub where people jostle for stocks or chase startup deals. It's a stretch of reddish-brown desert land, dotted with clay-tiled roofs, dark adobe walls, and sunsets streaked in purples and reds like an oil painting by an old master. I didn't choose Taos for investment or strategy. I chose it because it gave me something I had long been missing: peace. After all those years of pretending to be poor, of fighting power games in my own living room, of sitting through scheming luncheons at Le Jardin, I finally realized what I craved most wasn't victory. It was a place where I could breathe, a place where I could sip jasmine tea without wondering who was trying to snatch it away. I sold my old condo in Virginia and moved permanently to Taos. To everyone there, I was just another silver-haired woman in her 60s who liked wandering through weekend markets and buying handmade pottery from local artisans. Nobody asked how much money I had. Nobody whispered behind my back about the secret millionaire widow. I became simply Clara again, no titles, no shadow of the financial matriarch. And truth be told, I loved it. But I also knew if all I did was let money sit in the bank, then it was nothing more than cold, lifeless numbers. I wanted those numbers to mean something. That's how the Henry Fund was born, the name chosen to honor my late husband. The idea came to me on a quiet evening. I was sorting through Henry's old files when I stumbled upon his first handwritten notes about the data compression algorithm. His handwriting, crooked but firm, had a scribble in the margin. Could change the world if given the chance. Chance. That was the key word. Henry and I had been lucky we got our chance. We sold the patent, invested wisely, and built a fortune. But how many other bright young men and women out there carried ideas in their heads, yet never had the money to buy even a decent computer? So I decided the Henry Fund would do just that: support engineering students working on software, inventions, robotics, and apps. Beyond that, the fund would also provide scholarships for underprivileged kids, so no dream would die just because of an empty wallet. On the opening day of the fund, I invited a few close friends and some professors from the local university. No press, no cameras, no red ribbons. I hated noise and showmanship. All I wanted was to see kids receiving laptops, scholarships, and to watch their eyes light up, knowing tomorrow they'd still get to study. A month later, I received my first thank you email from a student. He sent me a video of a homemade recycling robot, Tiny, trembling on the table, but still able to pick out plastic bottles and drop them in the right bin. I must have replayed that clip a dozen times, laughing and wiping away tears. That little baby robot gave me more joy than any multi-million-dollar deal I'd ever signed. While I built the Henry Fund, Lucas slowly healed too. 6 months after Jessica, he chose to start over. And this time, starting over meant marrying Sarah, the gentle elementary school teacher he'd met at a community workshop. The wedding was simple. No estates, no blinding diamond rings. Just a small garden, strings of yellow lights in the trees, and the laughter of Sarah's students singing for their teacher. I sat in the front row, held my son's hand, and felt a lightness in my chest. Lucas had chosen well. Sarah soon became more than just my daughter-in-law. She became my partner. She volunteered to help run the Henry Fund. Every time students came to present their projects, Sarah was the most excited, sitting in the front row, clapping with a smile as bright as sunshine. Once, a group of students presented a voice-to-text translation app for individuals with hearing impairments. Their slides were messy, the demo glitched, and their nerves showed. But Sarah was the first to jump up and clap. "You kids are amazing! I believe this app will help so many people." The students lit up instantly. I sat beside her thinking, this is the kind of teammate I want. Someone who sees the value in people, not just in balance sheets. From time to time, I'd hear scraps of news about Jessica from old acquaintances of the Reynolds family. After taking the $5 million, she disappeared from Lucas's life. Rumors placed her in Florida, then Texas, then London, sometimes tied to a wealthy businessman, sometimes to another startup project. I didn't care. In the book of my life, Jessica was just a closed chapter. Taos became home. I strolled through the farmer's market each morning buying fresh bread and flowers. I took pottery classes, hands covered in clay, with no one calling me the eccentric millionaire. Evenings, I attended open-air concerts, listening to Spanish guitars strumming into the desert wind. And every time the Henry Fund awarded a new scholarship, I thought of Henry. I imagined him sitting beside me, smiling at the sight of students clutching laptops, sketching diagrams, arguing over code. He would be proud because what we built wasn't just money, it was opportunity. I don't know how I'll be remembered. As a mother who shielded her son from a disastrous marriage, as a woman who pretended to be poor for 15 years, or as a silent investor behind countless companies. But I know how I want to be remembered, as someone who chose to turn wealth into opportunities for others, instead of shutting them out just to boast. When I'm gone, I don't need a statue or a lecture hall bearing my name. All I ask is that one day, 10 or 20 years from now, a student standing on a stage, presenting their invention, might recall for a fleeting second, I once had a scholarship from the Henry Fund. That would be enough. That Christmas Eve, I sat by the fire with Lucas and Sarah. The tree was decorated with handmade ornaments from Sarah's students. Laughter filled the house. Lucas held Sarah's hand, looked at me with shining eyes, and said, "Mom, I'm happy. I'm really happy." I smiled. In that moment, I knew. Every argument, every act of disguise, every power play, all of it had led me here. Watching Lucas and Sarah side by side, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. For so long I had hidden the truth, lived as though I had nothing, not because I feared losing money, but because I hadn't found anyone I trusted enough to carry it forward. But now, things were different. Lucas had grown through his pain. Sarah was genuine and full of heart. I thought, perhaps one day, when the time is right, I will reveal the entire fortune Henry and I built. No more hiding, no more pretending to clip coupons at the grocery store. I will pass it on to Lucas and Sarah, and I know I can rest easy, because I will not just be passing down money, but trust. Trust that they will use it not to flaunt, but to create to help students, to lift children, to nurture another generation. In that moment, my heart was at peace. Somewhere, Henry must be smiling too. And if anyone were to ask me how I chose to take revenge on the one who once called me a fat pig, I would take a sip of jasmine tea and answer, "The sweetest revenge is not to tear down those who insulted you, but to live joyfully, freely, and happily, while they vanish from your life."